Well, it's official, at least to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, Attorney General in that area, that Buford Pusser did indeed have involvement in the murder of his wife, Pauline. This goes all the way back to 1967. Now, what most people know about Buford Pusser came from that Walking Tall movie in the early 70s. And that was very, very loosely based on what really happened. The only really realistic part of that was the story he had told about what happened on the morning that his wife was murdered, that he and his wife were ambushed on that country road. She had gone with him because it was a pleasant early Sunday morning, and this ambush occurred as they were going on this call that turned out to be a bogus call. Now, there are a few people, even on YouTube, that have been pushing this conspiracy theory hard for years that he had involvement in this. I've been to those areas. I have explored those areas. You'll see those videos on this channel, including the video on that road where all of this occurred. And going there in person, without seeing anyone else's video, I can tell you that there was parts of his story that did not make sense. And the main one that did not make sense to me, that as he and his wife drove by, this car pulled out from behind the church, followed them down the road, and where it first caught up with them was the first shots that were fired. This didn't make sense to me, being the age I am. Being a car guy, I grew up in a garage. I got to drive from a very early age, before I even had a driver's license, all kinds of vehicles. And I can tell you, cars from that era did not accelerate at the speeds it would have taken for this to happen. These big land yachts, regardless of how large the motor was, these things didn't accelerate like cars do today, where you can get from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. That didn't happen with what we consider the sports cars, muscle cars, pony cars of that era. You can go back and look up the 0 to 60 times and 0 to 100 times on all of these vehicles. It didn't happen. And that was the thought that I constantly had in my head, traveling to that site and traveling between those two locations, is this car from a dead stop did not catch this car on that length of road. That is also one of the determinations that was made apparently by the TBI. Now, because of the story, because of the situation, and because of that era in the late 60s, an autopsy was not done on Pauline Pusser at that time. That is why her body was exhumed a couple of years ago, in order to have a proper autopsy performed. Part of this was due to the fact that a weapon came to light, and I think they wanted to do a comparison of bullet in her body. Was it fired from this weapon? In this TBI report, that information didn't come out. That is not what has drawn everyone to the guilty conclusion in this. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen that mentioned at all. Now, they are saying they are going to release all 1,000 pages of this investigation once they redact certain personal information, and everyone is going to be able to see this. So maybe something will come to light in that. But on their initial news release, this was not part of it. It came down to tracing this route, that the story just fell apart kind of with that, also based with all of the evidence photos of the vehicle at that time. And these have been out there for anyone to see for years and years and years, where you can see the blood on the door panels, you can see the blood inside the vehicles, you can see various investigators standing around doing their test on this vehicle. To the best that anyone knows, that vehicle was purchased by someone else, another auto dealer. They cleaned it up, patched up the holes that was in it, probably replaced the door panel, and sold the thing to somebody else who didn't even know what the car was, what the history of the car had been, passed through a few hands, probably ended up in a junkyard within 10 years, average life of a vehicle at that time, and has long since been crushed and it's gone. So the original vehicle is not available as far as anyone knows. But all of those photos from the investigation are available. And one thing that kept coming out is, why was there blood on the hood of this vehicle? Because that did not jive with anything that Buford Pusser had told in that story, in this entire scenario. There should not have been that amount of blood on the hood of the vehicle if his wife was shot in the vehicle as the vehicle was moving, and he stopped at some point and got her out of the vehicle and then put her back in the vehicle. But even with whatever damage to him, her, the reasoning was there should not be that amount of blood on the hood of this vehicle. And there is no way to determine, because I'm pretty certain a test wasn't done back then. They don't know whose blood it is on the hood of that vehicle. Is it his? Is it hers? And we may never have that answer. There may not be a way to determine that. But what we do know is investigators right now have enough evidence that if Buford Pusser was still alive, he would have been indicted. If he was still alive today, which he's not because he died 7 years later in an auto crash, but if the man was still alive today, even all these years later, and he would probably be pushing 100 years old, but they would indict him and take this to trial based on the evidence they have. That story that everyone bought into, that story that appeared in a magazine about the little country sheriff and this horrible thing that happened that got picked up and turned into this movie that was loosely based on events, come to find out, hey, not true. And there are a lot of people that are going to have an issue with that. And I bet there are a lot of people that still aren't going to believe, even with this evidence out, that he had anything to do with murdering his wife. And I certainly understand it's hard to admit being wrong about anything. None of us want to do that. But if you are 100% on the Buford was innocent side, as I have said and some other people have said over the last few years, this doesn't quite add up. If you go there and you think about it logically, it doesn't add up. But, and there's always a but, even though that part of the story can be disproven, that still isn't 100% that he actually did the deed. Common sense for the most part would say that if you're lying about this, probably is, but that proof doesn't exist. Now, it's interesting to think if this went to a jury trial, was he still alive? This went to a jury trial today with this evidence. Would a jury of 12 people in that part of the world convict him? Or would they decide there is not enough physical evidence to 100% say he did this, even though other parts of the story fell apart and have been disproven? And the answer to that is your guess is as good as mine, because we are never going to know. One of the things that did come out in this initial report is that she had had her nose broken at some point. And they are, of course, pointing this at domestic violence. There were some of her friends, different people after this was over, and everyone ignored that, said that, hey, this situation went on. And unfortunately, this situation was much more common in that era of the 1960s and much more hushed up and really not talked about like things are today. There were a lot of people in a lot of families, and I can tell you this from my own family, that were good at keeping secrets and taking secrets, bad things to their grave. So you have to always remember that all of this occurred in a different era. But they're basing this on the fact that during this autopsy, they found out that she had had a broken nose previously. I can tell you, I've had my nose broken a couple of times in life, and it wasn't from a fight. I had a friend back in high school that got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. He's feeling for the door in the darkness, and he missed because the door was in the middle, and he walked into the door and broke his nose again. He had already broken it playing sports. So you can't draw a 100% conclusion of, because she had a previous broken nose, that it was because of her husband. Who knows? She could have fallen down the steps somewhere. I mean, there's something could have happened somewhere along the way. There's all kinds of reasons that could have happened. More than likely, it is going to be the worst case scenario, but again, none of us are really going to know 100% for sure. Because you're dealing with something going all the way back to 1967. The children, stepchildren, they're all deceased now, as far as I know. So there is those people that were in the household that grew up with that, whether they ever came forward with information of what was going on, or whether they did what most people did from that era and just didn't talk about it, or after the deaths of both of these people that they just didn't want to put it out there and needed to keep the walking tall, incredible sheriff cleaning up the town legacy alive. Again, we'll never know the answer to that either. But we certainly all have opinions, and I want to hear yours down in the comments. Did you think that he was involved in this murder even before this? Has this evidence changed your mind to where you can say, well, I used to not think so, but now with this new evidence, with this story of Buford's falling apart on what happened on that country road that day, probably he did it. Or do you still feel, and that's okay, do you still feel that there's not enough evidence to prove that he was involved in this, that this whole scenario was set up, that he actually did this to her, and he actually did do this to himself and disfigure himself, obviously accidentally to the extent that he did, trying to cover this up? Because that has always been a sticking point with many, many, many people. The man almost died because of this. He spent 18 days in the hospital because of this. Went through multiple surgeries. Went through multiple surgeries after that, plastic surgeries, just to put himself kind of back together again, and he was never anywhere close to normal. And the line of thinking for a lot of people was he couldn't have done this to her because he would not have inflicted that much damage intentionally on himself. Maybe he didn't mean to, maybe he didn't think there would be as much damage as there was to himself. Again, I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing this out there, but I would really like to have your opinion on this. Get some good discussions going down in the comments, back and forth between all of us, as far as what you think really happened. So I'll throw that out there for now. Go back and watch these other videos I have on this Buford Pusser, Pauline Pusser stuff, especially the one with that drive, every foot of that drive between that church location and that first ambush location. Think about cars from vehicles from back in that era and decide for yourself. And as other updates come out, I may throw another video out. This is not a Buford Pusser channel. I try to throw some different interesting travel stuff out there, And this was part of my travel stuff that I was interested in. So with that said, everybody have a good day. Take care. We'll talk soon.